Christmas morning, 1858. Somewhere among the wide tobacco fields that stretched across central North Carolina, a transaction took place that would end in fire before the sun rose again the next day. The surviving records are fragmentary, intentionally so. According to some, what is known can be stated plainly. A child was sold, a mother was forced to watch, and by dawn on December 26th, one of the richest estates in the region had been reduced to ash, splintered timber, and scorched bone. The official investigation later blamed overturned lanterns and careless handling of flame. But those who were there, the ones who lived through it, told a different story in hushed voices. They spoke of a woman named Ruth, of silver exchanged hand to hand, and of a fire that burned with such intensity it warped the iron gates at the estate's entrance. What truly happened that Christmas night has been buried for more than a century and a half, hidden in courthouse storage rooms and private family archives never meant to be opened. Before we continue with the story of Ruth and the fire that destroyed Harrove Estate, if dark historical mysteries like this draw you in, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss future stories. And let me know where you're listening from. Leave a comment below with your state or city. Now let's return to North Carolina in 1858 and uncover what really happened that Christmas. The winter of 1858 had been unusually gentle across North Carolina's Piedmont region, where Harrove Estate covered nearly 400 acres of rich tobacco land. It was among the oldest properties in Randolph County. Founded in 1791 by Colonel William Hargrove, a Revolutionary War veteran who had received the land as compensation for his service. The colonel was a practical man, uninterested in ornament or sentiment. He built his house with thick brick walls and narrow windows, meant to shield against summer heat and winter cold. In the spring of 1792, he planted his first tobacco crop using seeds brought from Virginia. And by that autumn, the venture had already turned a profit. By the time the property passed his grandson, Edmund Harrove, in 1852, the estate had grown into a vast and carefully managed operation. It included 3 large tobacco barns, a 12-room main house, a separate kitchen building, stables, a smokehouse, a blacksmith's forge, a carpenter's shop, and quarters housing 43 enslaved people who worked the land. Each year, the estate produced close to 20,000 pounds of tobacco, most of it shipped north to Richmond before being exported to markets in Europe. Edmund Harrove was 34 years old when he assumed control of the estate. He had studied law at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, but never practiced. Instead, he returned home to oversee the family's holdings. In the county, he was known first as a businessman and only second as a planner. He kept detailed records of everything, every harvested bundle, every tool, every financial exchange, written carefully into leather-bound ledgers stored in a locked cabinet in his study. Those ledgers were his pride. At any moment, he could state the estate's value down to the final dollar. He was married to Caroline, the daughter of a Charleston merchant family. She was 28 years old, pale and slender, with a nervous temperament that had worsened after birth of their second child. Most of her days were spent upstairs in the main house, reading novels and writing long letters to her sisters in South Carolina. She rarely went outdoors, and when she did, she wore gloves and a wide-brimmed hat even in the coldest months. Their 2 sons, William and James, aged 7 and 5, were cared for primarily by an enslaved woman named Bess. She had been with the Harrove family since before Edmund's birth. Now in her 60s, gray-haired and bent with age, Bess remained sharp and attentive. She had raised Edmund and his sisters, and now she was raising his sons. She slept in a small room just off the kitchen, close enough to hear the boys if they cried out during the night. The estate itself followed a strict layout. The main house sat at the center. To the east stretched nearly 200 acres of tobacco fields. To the west lay vegetable gardens, orchards, and livestock enclosures. To the north stood the barns and workshops. And to the south, separated from the house by a wide dirt road, were the quarters, a row of 12 small cabins where the enslaved people lived. By most accounts, Edmund Harrove was neither exceptionally cruel nor particularly compassionate for his time. He did not administer punishments himself, leaving that role to his overseer, a man named Cyrus Dalton. But he also never interfered when Dalton carried them out. Food and clothing were provided in sufficient quantity, but nothing beyond that. The enslaved workers were allowed small garden plots behind their cabins and were given Christmas Day free from labor. At the same time, Edmund charged them for any additional supplies they required. He managed the estate as he managed everything else in his life, with cold efficiency and an unwavering focus on profit. Ruth had been born on Harrove Estate in the spring of 1834. Her mother, Denina, had arrived there as a young woman in the 1820s, purchased from a trader operating out of Fayetteville. Denina worked in the main house as a cook, a position that carried a certain standing within the enslaved community. She was known for her bread and pastries, and Caroline Harrove depended on her heavily, especially during periods of pregnancy when household management became difficult. Ruth grew up inside the main house, assisting her mother in the kitchen. She learned to read by quietly watching the Harrove children during their lessons, and she learned to cook by standing beside Denina, observing every movement as dough was kneaded and pots were stirred. She was a quiet, attentive child, with her mother's dark eyes and quick, capable hands. When Ruth was 11 years old, Denina fell ill with a sudden fever in the middle of summer. Within 3 days, she was dead. The doctor who examined her suspected typhoid, but could not be certain. Denina was buried in the small cemetery behind the quarters, placed in an unmarked grave alongside many others. After her mother's death, Ruth was sent to work in the fields. At first, she was too young for the heaviest labor and was given lighter tasks, carrying water, pulling weeds, gathering leaves after harvest. By the time she turned 14, she was working full days, bent over the tobacco rows from dawn until dusk, her hands permanently stained brown from the sap. She was 17 when she met Samuel. Samuel had been born on a plantation in Virginia and had been sold south when he was 15 years old. Edmund Harrove purchased him in 1850, along with 3 other men, to work primarily in the tobacco barns. Samuel was tall and broad-shouldered, with a quiet, steady strength that made him well respected among the others. He was not a man of many words, but when he spoke, people listened. He first noticed Ruth on a Sunday afternoon in late summer of 1851. She was sitting beside the creek that traced the eastern edge of the property, washing clothes in the shallow water. He had come down with a bucket to draw water and saw her there, sleeves rolled to her elbows, hair pulled back with a strip of cloth. He said something to her. Later he could never remember exactly what, and she looked up and smiled. They were married in the spring of 1852, in the way enslaved people were allowed to marry. There was no legal ceremony and no official record. But on a Sunday evening in April, they stood together before the others in the quarters, and an older man named Jacob, who had once been a preacher before he was sold, spoke a few words over them. Afterward, there was a small celebration. Someone had managed to get a chicken. There was cornbread and greens, and someone played a fiddle until the light faded. Samuel moved into Ruth's cabin, a small one-room structure with a dirt floor and a single narrow window. Inside were a bed made from rough planks with a straw mattress, a table, 2 stools, and a stone fireplace. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. For a time, life found a steady rhythm. They worked the fields during the day, and in the evenings they sat by the fire and talked. Samuel carved small things from wood, spoons, bowls, toys, while Ruth mended clothes or braided strips of fabric into rugs. On Sundays, they walked down to the creek and sat together, watching the sun sink behind the fields. Their daughter was born in March of 1857, on a cold, rain-soaked night. Ruth went into labor that afternoon, and by midnight the baby arrived. Samuel stayed with her the entire time, holding her hand, pressing a damp cloth to her forehead. When the child finally came, small, red-faced and crying, he wrapped her in a blanket and placed her in Ruth's arms. Ruth looked down at the tiny face, the dark eyes blinking up at her, and felt something shift deep in her chest, a fierce, almost painful love that took her breath away. She named the child Lily, after the wildflowers that grew near the creek. Lily was a strong, healthy baby, bright-eyed and quick to smile. She had Ruth's dark eyes and Samuel's wide forehead. By 6 months, she was laughing and reaching for anything within her grasp. By the time she turned 1, she was pulling herself upright, gripping the edge of the table with determined little hands. Ruth carried her into fields in a sling sewn from old cloth, setting her down in the shade while she worked the rows. In the evenings, she sang to her the old songs Denina had taught her, songs passed down through generations, songs about rivers, roads, and freedom. Samuel adored the child. He carved tiny toys for her from scraps of wood, mostly animals, a horse, a bird, a rabbit. He made them move and dance while Lily laughed and reached for them. He spoke to her in a low, gentle voice, telling stories about places he had never seen, places he had only heard described by others. Wide, flat lands where you could walk for days without seeing another soul, places where people lived free. For a brief time, despite everything, something close to happiness lived inside that small cabin in the quarters. But Edmund Hurrell's ledgers told a far colder story. The tobacco crop of 1857 had failed. A late frost in April damaged the young plants, followed by a dry summer that stunted what survived. The leaves were thin and brittle, the plants weak. When harvest came, the yield was less than half of what Harrove had projected. By autumn, he was in debt to a merchant in Greensboro who had extended him credit for seed and supplies. The merchant wanted payment, and Harrove did not have it. All winter, Edmund searched for a solution. He considered selling part of the land, but prices were low and he refused to divide the estate. He thought about taking a loan, but after the Panic of 1857, when several major plantations in the region collapsed, banks were reluctant to lend to planters. In November, a man named Josiah Trent arrived at the estate. Trent was a slave trader based in Richmond, Virginia, but he traveled a regular circuit through North and South Carolina, buying and selling people the same way other men traded livestock. He was in his 40s, large-framed, with a thick beard and eyes that never softened. He wore fine clothes, a wool coat, leather boots, a gold watch chain, and carried himself with the confidence of someone who knew his business was lucrative. He paid in cash and asked few questions. Harrove met him in the study. They sat across from each other at the desk for nearly 2 hours. Trent had his own ledger listing current prices for men, women, and children in different markets. Harrove opened his books, pages filled with names and ages of every person on the estate. They negotiated carefully. Trent wanted young men, strong field hands who could be sold farther south, where the cotton industry was booming. Harrove hesitated to part with his best workers, but he needed money. They agreed on 3 men, all in their 20s, healthy and strong. Trent offered $800 for each. It still wasn't enough to cover the debt. Trent leaned back in his chair and studied the ledger again. "You got any children?" he asked. Harrove hesitated. "A few," he said. "Some light-skinned." Trent's mouth curved into a smile. Light-skinned children brought good money in Richmond, especially girls. People liked to buy them young, raise them in the house, teach them sewing, cooking, cleaning. They were easier to shape when they were small. "I'll give you $200 for a healthy child," Trent said. $250 if she's particularly light." Harrove looked down at his ledger and traced a finger down the list until it stopped. "Lily," he said, "born March 1857, daughter of Ruth and Samuel." Trent wrote the name into his own book. "I'll take her." When Trent left the state, he carried a list of 4 names, 3 men and 1 child. Ruth's name was not among them. Lily's was. Christmas Day, 1858, began like most winter mornings on the estate, cold and gray, with a thin fog hanging low over fields. The temperature had dropped overnight, frost crunching underfoot. The enslaved people had been given a day off from work, as was customary. It was one of the few days each year when they were not required to be in the fields before sunrise. Some gathered in the quarters, sharing whatever small amounts of food they had managed to save or trade for. Others stayed inside their cabins, huddled close to their fires, try and keep warm. Ruth woke early. Lily was restless, teething and feverish. She had cried and squirmed through most of the night, and Ruth had held her close, rocking her gently and singing in a low voice. Samuel had gone to the main house before dawn. Harrove had sent for him to help move furniture in preparation for a small gathering planned for that evening. He had promised Ruth he would be back by midday. Ruth sat by the fire with Lily in her lap. The baby was calmer now, her eyes half closed, one small fist wrapped tightly around Ruth's finger. Ruth hummed softly, the same song her mother used to sing to her when she was young, a song about a river, a road, and a place where the sun never failed to shine. Around 10 o'clock in the morning, there was a knock at the cabin door. Ruth looked up, and even before she stood, she knew something was wrong. No one knocked on Christmas morning. No one came to the cabins unless there was trouble. She rose slowly, Lily still in her arms, crossed the small room, and opened the door. Edmund Harrow stood there. Behind him was Josiah Trent. Ruth's breath caught in her throat. She stepped back instinctively, pulling Lily closer to her chest. Harrow's face was blank. He did not look at Ruth but past her, into the cabin, as if he were inspecting it. "The child been sold," he said. His voice was flat, professional. "Trent is taking her to Richmond this afternoon." Ruth's arms tightened around Lily. The baby squirmed and whimpered. "No," Ruth said. The word barely made a sound. Harrow finally looked at her. His expression did not soften. "It's done. The papers are signed." Ruth shook her head. Please. She's just a baby. She's not even 2. Trent stepped forward. He was a large man, wide through the shoulders, his face unreadable. "Make it easier on yourself," he said. "Hand her over." Ruth backed toward the far wall of the cabin. "Please," she said again. "Please don't do this." "She'll bring a good price in Richmond," Trent said. "Light-skinned children always do. Someone will raise her in a house, teach her to sew or cook. She'll have a better life than she'd have here." "She's my daughter," Ruth said. Harrow's reply was immediate and cold. "She's my property, and I need the money." Ruth stared at him, really stared, at his fine coat, his polished boots, his clean hands, at the gold watch chain hanging from his vest, at the face that showed no sign of doubt or shame. "You're selling my baby on Christmas," she said, her voice trembling. "On Christmas." Harrow did not answer. What followed took less than a minute. Trent moved fast, crossing the cabin in 2 long strides. He tore Lily from Ruth's arms with practiced efficiency, the kind that came only from repetition. The baby screamed, a sharp, piercing wail that cut through the cold morning air. Ruth lunged forward, reaching for her child, but Harrow grabbed her arm and held her back. She fought him, clawing at his hands, kicking and screaming, but he was stronger. He twisted her arm behind her back and forced her to the floor. Trent was already out the door, Lily shrieking in his arms. Ruth screamed. It came from somewhere deep inside her, a sound of pure, tearing agony. She screamed until her voice broke, until her throat burned raw. Harrow released her and stepped away. She collapsed onto the dirt floor, shaking and sobbing. He looked down at her for a moment, his face distant and unmoved. "You'll get over it," he said. Then he turned and walked out, closing the door behind him. Ruth stayed on the floor, her body racked with sobs. She could still hear Lily crying, the sound fading as Trent carried her farther away. She heard the creak of a wagon, the jingle of harness, the crunch of horse hooves on frozen ground. And then there was nothing but silence. By noon, Josiah Trent's wagon was gone, rolling north toward Virginia. Lily lay in the back, wrapped in a blanket, still crying. The 3 men Harrow had sold were chained beside her, their faces empty with shock and resignation. Ruth did not move from the cabin floor for hours. When Samuel returned and found her there, He said nothing. He knelt beside her and held her while she cried. Eventually, the tears stopped, and when they did, something else settled into her place. Something cold, solid, and unyielding. That evening, as the sun sank and the air grew colder, Ruth finally stood. She walked out of the cabin, across the quarters, and toward the main house. Samuel tried to follow, but she stopped him. "Don't follow me," she said quietly. There was something in her voice that made him freeze where he stood. She did not go to the front door. She went to the kitchen building, the separate structure connected to the house by a covered walkway. The fire in the hearth was still burning. It always was during winter, kept alive to make morning cooking easier. Ruth stood there for a long time, staring into the flames. She thought of Denina, her mother, who had worked in this kitchen for 20 years before she died. She thought of the countless meals she had helped prepare, the hours spent standing at this hearth cooking for people who saw her as no more than a tool. She thought of Lily, of her small hands and bright eyes, of her laughter when Samuel made the wooden animals dance, of the way she had reached for Ruth that morning, fingers grasping at empty air as Trent carried her away. And she thought of Edmund Hargrove, of his cold eyes, his ledgers, his gold watch chain, of the way he had said, "You'll get over it," as though losing a child were no different than misplacing furniture or breaking a tool. Ruth bent down and lifted a burning log from the hearth. The heat scorched her hands, but she did not release it. She carried it along the covered walkway and into the main house. She went first to the study, the room where Hargrove kept his ledgers, where it sat across from Josiah Trent and negotiated the price of her daughter's life. She placed the burning log on the desk, directly on top of the open ledger. The paper ignited at once, flames crawling outward, spreading quickly across the pages. She stood there for a moment, watching the names curl and blacken. All those names, all those lives reduced to lines of ink in a book. Then she turned and walked away. She went next to the parlor, the room where Caroline Hargrove kept her expensive furniture and imported rugs. Ruth set fire to the curtains and watched as the fabric caught, flames racing upward. From there she moved through the dining room, then the sitting room, then the hallway. By the time she reached the front door, the entire first floor was burning. She stepped outside into the cold night air and stood in the yard, watching the flames climb higher. Shouts echoed across the grounds now. People were running. Someone was screaming. Ruth did not move. She stood there with blistered, bleeding hands, staring as the house burned. The fire raged for hours, consuming not only wood and brick, but the fragile illusion of order men like Edmund Hargrove tried to impose on a system built entirely on human suffering. By the time neighbors arrived, drawn by a glow visible for miles across the flat Piedmont countryside, nothing could be done. The main house was fully engulfed, flames shooting 30 feet into the night sky. The heat was so intense that no one could approach within 50 yards. They formed a bucket line from the well anyway, more from instinct and hope, passing water hand to hand in a futile attempt to slow the blaze. Edmund Hargrove and his family escaped through a second-floor window on the east side of the house. Caroline jumped first, landing badly and breaking her ankle. The two boys were lowered down by their father and caught by Bess, who had been among the first to notice the fire. Hargrove came last. By the time his feet hit the ground, his nightshirt was scorched and his face streaked black with soot. They huddled together in the yard, wrapped in blankets brought from the quarters, watching their home burn. William, the older boy, cried openly. James, the younger, stared at the flames without blinking. Caroline sat in shock, her broken ankle twisted at an unnatural angle, her skin pale and slick with sweat despite the cold. The enslaved people from the quarters came running when they saw the fire. Some joined the bucket line. Others rushed to save what they could from the outbuildings, the smokehouse, the stables, the tobacco barns. The kitchen building, connected to the main house by the covered walkway, caught fire around midnight and burned to the ground. One of the tobacco barns downwind caught flying sparks and was lost as well. By dawn on December 26, The main house was nothing but a smoldering ruin. The walls had collapsed inward, leaving only the brick chimneys standing, cracked and blackened. At the entrance to the property, the iron gates had warped from the heat, their decorative scrollwork twisted and melted into unnatural shapes. Ruth was found sitting on the ground near the remains of the house. Her hands were burned and blistered, her dress scorched and torn. She did not resist when Cyrus Dalton, the overseer, seized her arm and pulled her to her feet. She did not speak. Samuel tried to reach her, but Dalton shoved him back. "Stay where you are," he said. Ruth looked at Samuel once. Only once. Her eyes were dry. She did not cry. She did not say anything. She looked at him, then turned her gaze away. Dalton dragged her to the barn and locked her inside. The inquiry began 2 days later. The county sheriff, Thomas Garrett, arrived with a deputy and a clerk to take statements. He questioned Edmund Harrow first, then Caroline, then several of the enslaved people who had been nearby when the fire started. Harrow's account was simple. He claimed he had been asleep when the fire began, awakened by the smell of smoke and the sound of his wife screaming. He said he had gotten his family out as quickly as possible. He believed the fire had started from a lantern left burning in the kitchen, or perhaps a spark from the hearth. When pressed, he admitted that Ruth had been seen near the kitchen building shortly before the fire broke out. When asked why she might have been there, he hesitated. There was an incident earlier in the day, he said at last. A child was sold. The child's mother was upset. Sheriff Garrett wrote this down. Upset enough to burn your house down? Harrow did not answer directly. I don't know what she was thinking, but she was the last person seen near the kitchen before the fire. The sheriff interviewed Ruth the following day. She was still locked in the barn, her hands wrapped in strips of cloth Bess had brought her. She sat on the dirt floor with her back against the wall, staring into nothing. "Did you set the fire?" Garrett asked. Ruth did not respond. "If you confess, it'll go easier for you," he said. "The judge might show leniency." Ruth looked at him. Her eyes were hollow. "What will you do to me?" she asked. Her voice was hoarse from screaming the day before. "That's up to the judge," Garrett replied. "Will you hang me?" Garrett shifted uncomfortably. "That's up to the judge," he said again. Ruth looked away. "Then it doesn't matter what I say." The inquiry ended 3 days later. The official conclusion was inconclusive. There was no direct proof that Ruth had set the fire, only suspicion and circumstance. But there was also no explanation that made sense otherwise. Despite everything, Edmund Harrow did not push for a trial. Some said he wanted to avoid attention. A trial would bring newspapers, questions, scrutiny. It would mean people asking why he sold a baby on Christmas morning. It would expose his debts, his business dealings, his ledgers. Others believed he knew exactly what a trial would uncover, that he had sold a child for $200 in silver, that he had destroyed a family to pay a debt, that he had done it on Christmas of all days. Whatever his reasoning, he made a decision. Ruth would be sold quietly, quickly, to someone far enough away that the story would not follow her. 3 weeks later, a broker from Charleston arrived. His name was Marcus Finch. He specialized in what he called difficult cases, enslaved people who had resisted, run away, or caused trouble. He paid less than market value, but he paid in cash and asked no questions. He gave Edmund Harrow $150 for Ruth, $50 less than Harrow had received for Lily. Ruth was taken away on a cold morning in late January. She did not say goodbye to Samuel. She did not look back at the quarters, the fields, or the blackened ruins of the main house. She climbed into the back of Finch's wagon and sat down, her hands still wrapped in bandages, her face blank and unreadable. Samuel watched her leave. He stood outside their cabin, his fists clenched, his jaw set tight. He did not cry. He did not speak. He watched until the wagon disappeared down the road. That night, he went into the cabin and found the small wooden rabbit he had carved for Lily. He held it for a long time, his fingers tracing the smooth curves of the wood, remembering the way Lily had laughed when he made a hop across the table. Then he wrapped it in a scrap of cloth and buried it beneath the floorboards in the corner where Lily's cradle had once stood. The years that followed were hard ones for Hargrove Estate. Edmund Hargrove rebuilt, but the cost was heavy and the money scarce. He borrowed from banks in Greensboro and Raleigh, using the land itself as collateral. He hired new workers to replace those he had sold, but labor was expensive and the tobacco harvest remained unreliable. By 1860, the estate was barely surviving. He constructed a new house, smaller and plainer than the original, with fewer rooms and no ornamentation. It was practical and nothing more. He rebuilt the kitchen as a separate building again, but this time placed it farther from the main house, with a stone foundation and a tall brick chimney rising well above the roofline. Fire safety became an obsession. Every door in the house had a lock. Every window had shutters that could be barred from the inside. Buckets of water were stationed around the property, and a bell was installed near the house to be rung in an emergency. He kept a rifle beside his bed and slept poorly. Caroline never truly recovered from the fire. Her ankle healed badly, leaving her with a permanent limp, but the deeper wound was not physical. She developed an overwhelming fear of fire. She refused to allow candles in the house, insisting on oil lamps only, and only when someone was present in the room. She would not let the boys play near the hearth. She suffered nightmares, waking in the night screaming that she smelled smoke. By 1861, she had stopped leaving the house altogether. She spent her days in the upstairs bedroom, reading the same books again and again, writing letters to her sisters that she never mailed. She rarely spoke to Edmund, and when she did, it was usually to ask about the locks on the doors or the water in the buckets. The boys grew up beneath the shadow of the fire. William, the elder, became quiet and withdrawn, waking from sleep in tears after dreams filled with flames. James developed a stutter that never fully left him. Among the enslaved people, the fire was spoken of only in whispers, not where Hargrove or Dalton could hear, but quietly among themselves. They told the story of Ruth and Lily, of Christmas morning, of Ruth walking into the main house with a burning log in her hands. Some said she had been right, that Hargrove deserved to lose his house, his wealth, his sense of control. He had taken something from her that could never be returned, and she had taken something from him in exchange. Others said it had only made things worse, that the fire accomplished nothing but more suffering. But everyone agreed on one thing. Ruth had made a choice. If she could not have her daughter, Edmund Hargrove would not have his house. Samuel never spoke of Ruth after she was taken away. He continued working in the tobacco barns as before, but he was quieter now. He no longer carved wood. He no longer sang. He kept to himself, and people learned not to ask him questions. In the spring of 1861, when the war began, several younger men on the estate tried to escape, hoping to reach Union lines. 2 succeeded. 3 were caught and returned. Samuel did not attempt to run. He simply kept working, day after day, his face blank, his hands moving to the familiar motions of stripping tobacco leaves and hanging them to dry. In 1863, Cyrus Dalton, the overseer, was conscripted into the Confederate Army. He was killed at Gettysburg that July. Afterward, Edmund Hargrove tried to manage the estate himself, but he was overwhelmed. Tobacco crops failed 2 years in a row. The workers, sensing that the war might bring change, became less compliant. Some simply stopped working, daring Hargrove to respond. By 1865, when the war ended, the estate was in shambles. The fields were overgrown. The barns were deteriorating. The new house, only 5 years old, already looked neglected and worn. When emancipation reached North Carolina, Samuel was among the first to leave. On a warm morning in May, he walked off the estate carrying nothing but the clothes he wore and the small wooden rabbit he had dug up from beneath the floorboards of his cabin. He headed north, following the roads toward Virginia. He did not know where he was going. He had no plan. He only knew he could not stay. He never found Lily. He tried. He asked everyone he met if they had heard of a light-skinned girl, about 8 years old by then, who might have been sold in Richmond in 1858. No one knew anything. Records had been destroyed during the war. Traders were dead or scattered. The trail was gone. Eventually, Samuel settled in a small town in Southern Virginia and worked as a carpenter. He never married again. He never had other children. He kept a wooden rabbit on a shelf in his room, and some nights he would take it down and hold it, remembering. He died in 1891 at the age of 63 and was buried in a small cemetery outside the town in an unmarked grave. Edmund Hargrove held onto the estate until 1871. By then, he was 47 years old, but looked 2 decades older. His hair had turned gray, his hands trembled, and he suffered from a constant cough that the doctor said was caused by smoke inhalation from the night of the fire, even though more than 10 years had passed. In the spring of 1871, he suffered what the doctor called a failure of the heart. He collapsed in the study of the new house, the same room where he kept his ledgers. One of the workers found him slumped over his desk, a pen still clutched in his hand. He was buried in the family plot on the estate beside his father and grandfather. Caroline and the boys left soon after, returning to Charleston. Caroline died in 1875. William became a clerk for a shipping company and never married. James went west of Texas and vanished from the records entirely. The estate passed through several owners in the decades that followed. The newer house was torn down in 1885. The land was divided and sold off in pieces. By 1900, all that remained of the original Hargrove estate, with a family cemetery and a few crumbling foundations hidden beneath brush and vines. But the story did not end there. In 1923, a man named Robert Vance purchased 50 acres of the former Hargrove property, including the grove where the main house had once stood. Vance was a veteran of the First World War, originally from Pennsylvania, who had come south searching for inexpensive farmland. He was in his early 40s, unmarried, and walked with a limp caused by shrapnel lodged in his left leg during the Battle of the Argonne Forest. He cleared part of the grove and built a small house near the creek. It was simple: 2 rooms, a stone fireplace, and a front porch. He planted a vegetable garden and kept a few chickens. He lived alone and seemed content with the quiet. For the first year, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. He worked his land, sold produce at the local market, and kept mostly to himself. The neighbors found him polite, but strange. He didn't attend church. He didn't socialize. He worked and went home. Then, in the summer of 1924, things began to change. At first, it was subtle. Vance would wake in the middle of the night smelling smoke. Not the familiar scent of wood from fireplace, but something sharper, harsher, like burning cloth or tar. He would get up and check the house. The fireplace was cold, the stove untouched. Nothing was burning. The smell would linger for a few minutes, then vanish. He told himself it was imagination, a trick of memory left over from the war. In France, he had smelled burning wood, burning earth, burning flesh. Perhaps his mind was replaying old horrors. Then came the sounds. Footsteps on the porch. Slow, deliberate steps, pacing back and forth. He would rise and open the door, but there was never anyone there, just the empty porch and the dark yard beyond. And sometimes late at night, he heard singing, a woman's voice, faint but unmistakable, low and mournful. The melody was unfamiliar. The words were indistinct, maybe English, maybe not, but the sorrow in it was unmistakable. He tried to ignore it. He told himself it was the wind or an animal or his mind playing tricks again. But the sounds continued night after night. The footsteps, the singing, the smell of smoke. In the fall of 1924, Vance decided to dig a new well. The old one near the house was drying up, and he needed a more reliable source of water. He chose a spot about 30 yards from the house, near where he believed the original main house had once stood. He began digging on a cool October morning. The ground was dense clay mixed with stone. He worked slowly, loosening the earth with a pickaxe and shoveling it out. By midday, he was about 4 feet down when his shovel struck something solid. At first, he thought it was a rock, but when he cleared away the dirt, he saw iron. A box, rectangular, about the size of a small trunk, rusted and heavy. Locked. Vance stared at it for a long time. Part of him wanted to bury it again, to fill the hole and forget it had ever been there. But another part, the part that had survived the war, the part that had learned to confront what lay buried, needed to know. He took a hammer and struck the lock. It took several blows before the corroded metal gave way. Inside were papers, ledgers, old, yellowed, brittle with age. Some were water damaged, the ink faded and unreadable. Others were still clear enough to read. He lifted them out carefully and spread them on the ground. They were account books, records of transactions, names, dates, prices. They were records of people, enslaved people, bought and sold like animals. Each entry listed a name, an age, a description, a value. Jacob, male, age 28, strong back, good worker, $800. Sarah, female, age 19, house-trained, $600. Moses, male, age 35, skilled carpenter, $900. Page after page, dozens of names, dozens of lives reduced to ink on paper. Then, near the bottom of one page, he saw an entry that made him stop. Lily, female, born March 12, 1857, light-skinned, sold December 25, 1858, $200. Beneath it, written in a different hand, smaller, tighter, in pencil rather than ink, was a note. He took my child. I took his house. We're even now. Vance sat back on his heels, staring at the words. He didn't know who had written them. He didn't know every detail of the story, but he knew enough. He looked up at the grove, at the trees growing over the ruins of the old house. He thought about the smell of smoke, the footsteps, the singing, and he understood. He gathered the ledgers, carried them back to his house, and burned them in the fireplace. He watched the pages curl and blacken, the names turning to ash. He didn't want them. He didn't want to know anymore. But burning the ledgers didn't stop anything. The smells continued, the footsteps, the singing. By the spring of 1925, Vance could endure it no longer. He sold the property and moved back north to Pennsylvania. He never spoke of what he had found, not for nearly 30 years. It wasn't until 1954, when he was 73 years old and living in a veteran's home in Harrisburg, that he finally told the story. A reporter from a local newspaper was researching the history of Randolph County. "I don't believe in ghosts," Vance said, sitting there, his voice steady but low, in a chair by the window of the home, staring out at the dull gray Pennsylvania sky. "I never have." Then he added, "But I'll tell you this, there was something wrong with that land. I don't know what it was. Maybe it was just my mind. Maybe it was the war, but I couldn't stay there." The reporter asked if he had ever told anyone else about the ledgers. Vance shook his head. Who would I tell? And what would it change? They're all dead now. Everyone involved. It's just history. And yet, as it turns out, history does not always stay buried. In 1968, a graduate student named Margaret Colby was researching her thesis on enslaved families in the antebellum South. She was 24 years old and studying at Duke University. While combing through courthouse records in Randolph County, she came across a brief reference to the Harrova State Fire. It was only a few lines in an inquiry report from 1859, but it stopped her cold. A fire on Christmas night. A woman suspected of arson. A child sold that same morning. Margaret began digging deeper. She located the full inquiry report, short and inconclusive. She uncovered property records documenting how the estate had been broken up and sold off over time. She examined tax rolls, census data, and family histories. Then, in a box of miscellaneous papers that had been misfiled in the courthouse basement, she found a letter. It was dated January 15th, 1859. It was addressed to Edmund Hargrove and written by Reverend Thomas Whitley, a Methodist minister who had served several congregations in the area. The letter was brief, handwritten in careful script on yellow paper. Mr. Hargrove, I write to you with a heavy heart. I have heard what transpired on Christmas Day, and I have heard what followed. I do not presume to judge you, for judgment belongs to God alone, but I must tell you this. The woman Ruth came to me before she was taken away. She did not confess to setting the fire. She did not deny it either. She said only this: he took my child. I took his house. We are even now. I fear, Mr. Hargrove, that you are not even. I fear that what you have sown, you will reap in ways you cannot yet imagine. I urge you to seek forgiveness, not from me, but from the Lord, and to make amends where you can. Your servant in Christ, Reverend Thomas Whitley. Margaret Colby copied the letter and included it in her thesis, titled Fractured Families: The Impact of Child Sales on Enslaved Communities in North Carolina, 1820 to 1865. The work was thorough and carefully argued, but it was never published. She left graduate school in 1970 to marry and never returned to finish her degree. Still, a copy of the thesis found its way into the archives of the North Carolina State University Library, where it sat largely unnoticed for decades. In 2003, a historian named Dr. Alan Pritchard discovered Colby's thesis while researching a book on resistance among enslaved people in North Carolina. He was in his 50s, a professor at a small college in Virginia, and had spent most of his career studying the ways enslaved people resisted the system that bound them. The letter from Reverend Whitley struck him deeply, and he decided to investigate further. Over the next 2 years, Pritchard tracked down every fragment of information he could find about the Hargrove estate, Ruth, and the fire. He combed through property deeds, tax records, and family papers. He searched for descendants of those who had been enslaved on the estate. He traveled to South Carolina, hoping to find records of Ruth after her sale, but found nothing. The documents had been destroyed, lost, or never recorded at all. What he did find were descendants, people whose great-great-grandparents had lived on the Hargrove estate, people who had grown up hearing fragments of the story passed down through generations. One of them was a woman named Evelyn Morris. She was 91 years old, living in a nursing home in Greensboro. Her mind was sharp, her eyes clear, and she remembered the stories her grandmother had told her. My great-great-grandmother's name was Denina, Evelyn said, sitting by the window of her room, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She was Ruth's mother. She died when Ruth was still young. But before she died, she made Ruth promise something. Evelyn paused, gazing out at the parking lot below. She made her promise that no matter what happened, she would never let them break her, that she would never let them take everything. After a moment, Evelyn continued. When they took Lily, Ruth kept that promise. She didn't let them take everything. She took something back. Dr. Pritchard asked if Evelyn knew what had happened to Ruth after she was sold. She died, Evelyn said softly, in South Carolina. I don't know exactly when. Sometime before the war ended, I think. But before she died, she sent a message back. It was passed from person to person, carried between plantations. The message was simple. Tell Samuel I kept my promise. Pritchard asked what the promise had been. Evelyn looked directly at him. The promise she made to her mother, that she would never let them break her. Dr. Pritchard published his findings in 2005 in an academic journal. The article was titled Resistance and Retribution: The Hargrove Estate Fire of 1858. It appeared in the Journal of Southern History and drew modest attention within scholarly circles. Other historians cited it, but the story remained largely unknown outside academia. That changed in 2017. That year, a documentary filmmaker named Jessica Haynes was developing a project about overlooked acts of resistance during slavery. She was in her 30s, based in New York, and had spent months searching for stories that challenged narrow ideas of what resistance looked like. She came across Pritchard's article and contacted him. They spoke by phone for hours. He told her everything: the letter, The interviews, the records, the message Ruth had sent back. Jessica was captivated. She decided to make a documentary about the story. In the spring of 2017, Jessica and Dr. Pritchard traveled together to Randolph County. They located the land where the Hargrove estate had once stood. It was now part of a larger farm owned by the same family for 3 generations. The current owner, a man named Dale Hutchins, was in his 60s, a tobacco farmer who had inherited the property from his father. Jessica and Pritchard explained their project, and Hutchins gave him permission to continue, explore the property. They brought in ground-penetrating radar and a small team of archaeologists from the University of North Carolina. For 2 weeks, they surveyed the land, mapping the locations of long-vanished structures and searching for anything that might have survived beneath the soil. What they uncovered was extraordinary. Beneath a grove of pine trees marking the spot where the main house had once stood, they found the remains of the foundation. The bricks were blackened and fractured by fire, but unmistakably intact, buried beneath decades of soil and fallen needles. And beneath that foundation, they discovered something else. Hidden under what would have been the floor of the study was a small, stone-lined pit, carefully constructed and deliberately concealed. Inside were the remains of burned ledgers, pages charred and brittle, but still partially legible. The archaeologists excavated them slowly, using brushes and tweezers to lift each fragile fragment. Among those pages, they found something that did not belong there, a small wooden carving of a rabbit. It was about 3 inches long, carved from a single piece of wood. The details were still visible: the long ears, the rounded body, the tiny tail. It had been made with care, with patience, with love. Jessica held it in her hands, turning it over slowly. Then she looked at Pritchard. "This is Samuel's carving," she said. "The one he made for Lily." Pritchard nodded, slowly. "But how did it get here?" "Samuel left after the war. He took it with him." They looked at each other, both arriving at the same conclusion. "Ruth," Jessica said. "Ruth must have had it. Somehow she got it back. And she buried it here, beneath the house, beneath the ledgers." The implication was staggering. Ruth hadn't set the fire in a sudden, uncontrolled burst of rage. She had planned it. She had gone into the study, found the ledgers, the meticulous records of every person Edmund Hargrove had bought and sold, and she had burned them, not just to destroy the house, but to destroy the documentation itself, to erase, as much as she could, the written proof of transactions that had torn families apart. And she had left the rabbit there as a marker, a message. Later, reviewing the findings of the documentary, Dr. Pritchard offered his interpretation. Ruth knew she couldn't save Lily. She knew she couldn't undo what had already been done. But she could make sure that Hargrove's records, his careful accounting of human suffering, did not survive. She could take that away from him. And she did. The carving was her way of saying, "This is for Lily. This is for all of us. You can't erase us. We were here. We mattered." Jessica Haynes' documentary, The Fire That Ruth Set, premiered at the Tribeca Film Festival in 2018. It won the award for Best Documentary Feature and was later acquired by a major streaming service, where it reached millions of viewers. The film sparked intense debate. Some saw Ruth as a hero, a woman who resisted an impossible system in the only way available to her. Others argued that the fire was an act of desperation rather than resistance, and that romanticizing it ignored the danger it posed others and the complexity of her situation. Historians debated the evidence. Some questioned whether Ruth had truly planned the fire or whether the rabbit had ended up in the pit by coincidence. Others pointed to the message written in the ledger: "He took my child. I took his house." We are even now, as unmistakable proof of intent. But on one point, there was agreement. Ruth had made a choice. On Christmas night in 1858, she decided that if she could not have her daughter, Edmund Hargrove would not keep his house, his records, or his sense of security. She took something back. The land where the Hargrove estate once stood is quiet now. The pine grove remains, though some trees have been cleared over the years to make room for new growth. The foundations of the old buildings still lie beneath the soil, slowly being reclaimed by the earth. In 2019, the County Historical Society installed a small marker near the road. It is a 3-foot granite stone with a bronze plaque that reads, "Site of the Hargrove Estate, established 1791, destroyed by fire December 25, 1858, a place of labor, loss, and resistance, in memory of Ruth, Lily, Samuel, and all those whose names were lost." Dale Hutchins, the current owner of the land, has said he does not mind visitors as long as they are respectful. Some people come simply to see the place. Others leave flowers near the marker. A few leave small wooden carvings, rabbits, birds, horses, in memory of Lily and the other children taken from their families. The wooden rabbit found beneath the foundation is now part of the collection at the North Carolina Museum of History in Raleigh. It is displayed in a glass case alongside fragments of the burned ledgers and a copy of Reverend Whitley's letter. The exhibit is titled Resistance and Remembrance, the Hargrove Estate Fire. Ruth's final resting place remains unknown. Despite extensive research, no records of her death have ever been found. There is no grave, no official documentation of what became of her after she was sold to South Carolina in 1859. Some researchers believe she died during the war, when record-keeping across the South collapsed. Others believe she survived, took a new name, and disappeared into the chaos of Reconstruction. Lily's fate is an even deeper mystery. Josiah Trent's records were destroyed in a warehouse fire in Richmond in 1862, and there is no way to trace what happened to her after she left Randolph County on Christmas Day in 1858. Some descendants of enslaved families in the region have undergone DNA testing, hoping to find a connection, but so far nothing conclusive has emerged. There are theories. Some believe Lily was sold to a family in Richmond and raised as a house servant. Others think she was resold farther south, to Georgia or Alabama. A few believe she may have died young, from illness or neglect, her death never recorded. The truth is, we will probably never know. Edmund Hargrove's grave still lies in the family plot on what is now private property, about a mile from where the estate once stood. The plot is overgrown, the headstones tilted and weathered by time. His descendants, scattered across the country, have responded to the story in different ways. Some have expressed regret for what their ancestor had done. Some reached out to historical societies and museums, offering family documents and old photographs. Others remained silent, unwilling to confront a past they found too shameful to face. In 2020, one of Edmund Hargrove's descendants, a woman named Patricia Hargrove living in California, published an op-ed in a major newspaper. In it, she openly acknowledged what her ancestor had done and expressed support for reparations and historical accountability. "I can't undo what Edmund Hargrove did," she wrote. "I can't bring back Lily or Ruth or any of the people he bought and sold, but I can acknowledge the truth. I can say that what he did was wrong, and I can support efforts to make amends in whatever small way possible." The article sparked renewed debate. Some praised her for speaking out. Others criticized her, arguing that acknowledgement without concrete action meant very little. But the conversation continued, and perhaps that, more than anything, mattered. The fire Ruth set burned for hours on that Christmas night in 1858. It consumed not only wood and brick, but the fragile illusion of order that men like Edmund Hargrove tried to impose on a system built entirely on human suffering. It didn't end slavery. It didn't bring Lily back. It didn't even destroy every record Hargrove kept. Some survived, hidden away in that iron box beneath the ground. But the fire left something behind. A mark, a scar on the land and on history that refuses to fade. In the years since the documentary's release, the story of Ruth and the Hargrove Estate fire has become part of a broader conversation about slavery, resistance, and memory. It is taught in classrooms. It is discussed in book clubs. It has appeared in academic papers and public lectures. And every year on Christmas Day, a small group of people gathers at the marker by the roadside. They are descendants of enslaved families from the region, historians, activists, others who have been moved by the story. They hold a brief ceremony, a few words, a song, a moment of silence. They leave flowers and small wooden carvings. They remember, because that is what Ruth wanted. Not revenge, exactly, not justice in the legal sense, but remembrance, a refusal to let the story be buried and forgotten. She wanted people to know that she was there, that Lily was there, that they mattered. And now, more than a century and a half later, we do know. The story of Ruth and the fire she set on Christmas night in 1858 is a story of loss and rage, of impossible choices made in impossible circumstances. It is the story of a mother who lost her child and decided that if justice was out of reach, retribution would have to suffice. It is the story of a man who valued profit over humanity and paid a price for it, though perhaps not a high enough one. But more than anything, it is a story of resistance, of the ways people fight back, even when the odds are overwhelming, of the ways they refuse to be erased, even when the system is designed to erase them. Ruth could not save Lily. She could not free herself. She could not dismantle the system that enslaved her, but she could light a fire. And she did. And in its own way, that fire is still burning. What do you think of this story? Do you believe Ruth's act was justice, or simply tragedy piled upon tragedy? Was she a hero who fought back against an evil system, or a desperate woman who made an unbearable choice? Leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you enjoyed this story and want more dark historical mysteries like it, make sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share this video with someone who loves untold history. There are countless more stories buried in the past, still waiting to be uncovered. See you in the next one.